So basically you have regulators, right? You have different regulators. At the end of the day, though, everything starts from the European Union, from Brussels. Now, Brussels has implemented different regulators, different regulatory authorities. Now, when we talk about banking and financial services, you have ESMA, which is the European Securities and Markets Authority, which is responsible for financial services firms regulation in the European Union. You have the EBA, which is the European Banking Authority. Under the EBA, or could say in parallel with the EBA, you have the ECB, the European Central Bank. And basically, then you have some other international organizations such as IOSCO, which is International Securities Commissions Authorities. So basically regulators, local regulators, such as CISEC. For example, CISEC is under ESMA. You have the European Securities and Markets Authority, and then you have the national competent authorities, which are the local regulators. So you have the BaFin in France, you have CISEC in Cyprus, Hellenic Capital Markets Commission in Greece, and so on. So you have all of these regulators.
Is BaFin France or Germany?
No, BaFin is Germany. France is the AMF.
Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm. And the FCA used to be, it still is, but it's not European anymore, for the UK, for example, right? Yeah. So basically you have all of these enforcers of the regulation. So regulation comes from the European Union, basically goes to ESMA, and then ESMA produces the draft directives and regulations. Now, the European Union will publish two different types of material, regulation and directives. The difference between the two, in hierarchy, a regulation is higher than a directive. Why? Because a regulation comes from the European Union. Take it, implement it as it is. You don't need to pass it through your national legislation, right? GDPR, for example, the General Data Protection Regulation. It's so important, so it has to be effectively implemented the way it is. A directive, on the other hand, for example, the anti-money laundering guidance, which comes from Europe, is a directive. So that needs to be implemented in the national legislation. I don't know if you heard anything about the discussions nowadays in Cyprus about the potential for bypassing the 10,000 euro cash limit restrictions, which is imposed by the European Union directive on anti-money laundering. So there's a big discussion about that, exactly because it's a European Union directive which has been transposed into our national legislation, and you have some people in our parliament that are discussing about just doing their own thing and disregarding basically
the directive,
national law and the directive, which is insane, but we can talk about that later if you want.
Okay. Well, I mean, why not now? So explain why is it insane? Give us some insight there. I mean, I've got my opinions, but I'd like to hear yours.
Well, it's insane because, look, I mean, when it comes to anti-money laundering, people get very, very sensitive. And money laundering and anti-money laundering have this weird aura about them. You know, they have this mystic ability, right? I mean, when it comes to people talking about money laundering, wow, it's money laundering. What is it? How is it done? Why is it done? And don't forget that in Cyprus, I mean, we had the stigma of being money launderers for the Russians and before the Russians for the Serbians, you know, since the late 90s, right? As a jurisdiction, we had a fair share of, you know, finger pointing and pulling out by our partners in the European Union about facilitating money laundering. So basically, Cyprus fought really, really hard to get over this stigma. Now, was this stigma justified? To an extent, definitely, but not to the extent that we were accused of. What do I mean? Cyprus is a small place. Even if we wanted to, we wouldn't be able to facilitate money laundering to the scale that they accused us of facilitating, right? When you have a banking system which is a few dozen billion, how much money can you launder? I mean, when you're talking about Serbian and Russian money that's laundered, you're talking about hundreds of billions. Right, so we didn't have the ability. We would facilitate, perhaps through some structures, through some legal entities, some companies that were registered in Cyprus, but the banking wasn't here. I mean, there was some money that was passing through Cyprus banks, but in any case, I mean, maybe we didn't handle it correctly. Maybe it was a matter of we didn't strategically, tackle it from a PR perspective. It was definitely a lot of things that went wrong back in the day, back in 2013, I believe, right? So Cyprus got the stigma of money laundering, which still haunts us. Even nowadays, I mean, in some jurisdictions, Cyprus still has the stigma of being, a money laundering jurisdiction. Even though nowadays you have 2 European Union entities or properly penalized and entered into the grey list of the Financial Action Task Force in regards to money laundering. The Financial Action Task Force is a global organization that basically issues the guidance on anti-money laundering and then has a list of the bad guys and of the worst guys, right? So the bad guys are the guys that don't really adhere to the requirements. That's a gray list, or it's a list of jurisdictions with deficiencies. We call it a gray list. It's not really a gray list. And then you have the black list. The black list are the really bad boys. So you have your North Koreas, you have your Syrians, you have Myanmar, you have like really isolated regimes. Now, believe it or not, Malta was in this gray list at some point, which is a European Union country. Bulgaria is currently the gray list, right? But guess what? Cyprus still has a stigma.
Yeah.
So basically, if you go to a bank in the UK, to the Bulgaria and Cyprus, they're going to say, oh, Cyprus has money laundering problems. So if you are in the spotlight for so long, do you really want to go in and change and deviate from what the European Union is asking you to do in regards to transactions in cash? And cash transactions, the limit of 10,000 has been around for quite a few years now, right? So it's not something which is new and we're thinking if we should implement or not. I mean, it's there. It has been a requirement for more than a decade by the Financial Action Task Force and transposed into European Union requirements and transposed into Cyprus legislation. And now we're thinking about playing with that for what? Facilitate transactions in casinos? Well, last time I checked, 99% of the people that enter casinos, or all the people, have bank accounts and debit cards and credit cards, and now they have digital wallets, which I'm sure we're going to talk about later. Yeah. So why do they need the cash? You don't need the cash unless you're up to
something.
So it doesn't really make sense, right? It definitely does not make sense why we would want to do that. Why would you want to allow cash to be transacted in?